Today at the National Press Club, Australian Industry and Defence Network Chief Executive Mike Johnson. Amid regional instability, he'll argue the pressing need for Australia to accelerate efforts towards a self-reliant industrial and defence base by 2035. Mike Johnson with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. I'm Tom Connell, the club's president and a politics anchor at Sky News. Our guest today, Mike Johnson, Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Industry and Defence Network. He's addressed the race for sovereignty, building Australia's self-reliant industrial and defence base by 2035. He's had a long and varied career within defence and other sectors as well, including media and professional services throughout Australia, New Zealand and the US. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle is @PressClubAust, or you can use the hashtag NPC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mike Johnson.
Good afternoon. I acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters and community. I pay my respects to the people, the cultures and the elders past and present. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. Just one small point, if I may. I've had a long and illustrious career in defence industry. It is a slight misnomer to say I've been in defence direct, so I'd just like to correct that before we kick on. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Australia stands at a crossroads. The global environment is more uncertain and contested than at any point since the Second World War. The rise of China, doubts around AUKUS, procurement failures, workforce shortages, and the revolution in warfare driven by Ukraine all remind us that the stakes are high and the risks are real. That's why sovereignty by 2035 isn't optional. It's essential to Australia's security and prosperity. But sovereignty is not just about defence hardware or military alliances. It's about building the foundations of resilience here at home. Manufacturing strength is the backbone of resilience. Without it, sovereignty is just rhetoric. And to achieve that strength, we must face a hard truth. Productivity is Australia's new battleground. A strong sovereign defence industry means stronger national security, more high-value Australian jobs, and long-term economic growth. By investing in our people, our technology, and our industrial base, we can ensure Australia is not only well prepared for the challenges ahead, but also a nation that drives stability and prosperity in our region. AIDN is the peak industry body representing hundreds of Australian SMEs serving the defence sector. The sector employs around 60,000 people, contributing billions of dollars annually to the economy through sovereign supply chains, advanced manufacturing and research and innovation. AIDN champions the interests of Australian SMEs within the defence and national security sectors. So to hark back to the beginning of my address, why do I say Australia is at a crossroads? It's simple. A lot needs to change if Australia is to lift productivity and achieve a self-reliant defence base in an unpredictable world. To borrow a phrase from a famous ALP advertising campaign, it's time. Australia must prioritise and invest in its own defence industry, making it more self-reliant, innovative and adaptable to future challenges. A sovereign defence industry is vital for any nation that wishes to maintain its independence in military decision-making. Australia's current reliance on foreign imports for military hardware, maintenance and technology presents risks. With globally shifting geopolitical tensions, the vulnerability of relying on overseas supply chains becomes evident. In times of conflict or crisis, such supply chains could be disrupted, leaving Australia dependent on the goodwill of other nations for critical defence resources. So achieving Australian sovereignty in defence is absolutely non-negotiable. Australia must accelerate the development of a self-reliant industrial and defence base to secure its future in an unpredictable world. That's not to say that Australia does not have valuable allies such as the US and the UK, or that it should not continue to encourage the involvement of foreign defence primes in Australian industry. But look at the uncertainty created by the Trump administration. At the moment, the Trump administration has imposed a 10% general tariff on all Australian goods, plus 50% on aluminium, steel and copper. Australian defence SMEs are not alone in being affected, but it represents just another cost burden to bear. And at a time when we have negotiated licence-free exports between the trilateral partners involved in AUKUS. How does that make any sense? To add costs to what is already a $368 billion enterprise. Such tariff moves are detrimental to US, UK and Australian defence industry at a time when unity has never been more important. The defence industrial sector involves hundreds of companies, ranging from large multinationals to small micro businesses that provide niche services. A seat at the table for the SME sector is vital, or Australian industry could easily become an afterthought for its inclusion in the multitude of projects Australia is undertaking. Australian industry must be incorporated in the planning of all defence activities. One of the most fundamental changes needed is to recognise the definition of Australian business laid down in the Defence Industry Development Strategy, which falls short of securing sovereign Australian defence industry that the Albanese government seeks. Under the current definition, any foreign equipment manufacturer could set up a subsidiary in Australia and employ a local workforce and be considered Australian. What was missing, and as it applies in most other countries, was any requirement for local ownership or local board control of decisions. Finance Minister Katie Gallagher is to be commended for making changes to the definition of an Australian business in the Commonwealth procurement rules, and this should be extended to cover defence procurement. The stark reality for many SMEs in the sector is that despite increases in defence spending, much of this has gone either to AUKUS or the Global Weapons Explosive Ordnance Program. This leaves traditional areas of defence underfunded. The stark reality for many SMEs in the sector is that despite increases in defence spending, much of this has gone either to AUKUS or GWEO. This has seen orders slow down or be cancelled altogether, while primes have held on to their work to ensure there is sufficient work for their own in-house employees. But defence SMEs are not asking for a handout, they're asking for a hand up. So of course AIDN supports an increase in the defence budget to support SMEs in the provision of adequate capabilities to the warfighter in keeping with a more dangerous world. But I can hear the sceptics in the audience saying, well, AIDN would say it wants a defence budget increase, wouldn't it? But AIDN is not supporting an increase in defence spending for any self-serving reason. Whether we go to 3 or 3.5%, it must be accompanied by serious defence procurement and industry policy reform. Despite lofty goals and frameworks, analysis points to a reduction in domestic defence industry funding in real terms. Although nominal budgets have increased, reaching $55 billion in 24-25, and projected to rise to nearly $67 billion by 27-28, defence spending remains stuck around 2% of GDP, with real growth at only 0.8% in 25-26. AIDN has called for an increase in defence spending. We've done that for some time, adding its voice to analysts, former ministers, the opposition and think tanks alike. It really seems an open and shut case. While frameworks and rhetoric around sovereignty grow stronger, the reduction in domestic defence industry funding in real and tangible terms risks undermining Australia's sovereignty and security. Australia is investing heavily in future platforms like nuclear submarines and long-range weapons. But much of that investment falls to later in the 2020s and into the 2030s. Meanwhile, small to medium enterprises that drive innovation, munitions production, sustainment, and other technologies are squeezed for short-term support. Genuine sovereign capability requires building robust supply chains, local manufacturing and munitions output, and domestically developed autonomous systems. This needs consistent funding and procurement policies aligned with a commitment to local content, including grant schemes, procurement quotas, and early-stage capital access. Reform defence procurement in Australia, and this will lead to an improvement in productivity and cut the waste in defence spending. Australia should increase defence spending because the circumstances require it. We need to have the capabilities to defend ourselves. That should be the underlying determinant of the required defence budget. The importance of a self-sustained sovereign defence capability is especially evident when you consider the ongoing tensions in the South China Sea, the rise of global terrorism, and the increasingly assertive military postures of other countries. For Australia to safeguard its own interests, we must have the capacity to produce, maintain, and upgrade defence systems without undue reliance on foreign nations. This will give Australia greater autonomy in defence strategy and decision-making, ensuring its security interests are not compromised by external pressures or delays. So what's the solution? Well, Australia has made progress in recent years. Let's grant the government that. The Defence Industry Development Strategy spells out areas where government believes Australian SMEs can be competitive. The 7 sovereign defence industrial priorities include the maintenance, repair, overhaul and upgrade of ADF aircraft, continuous naval shipbuilding and sustainment, sustainment and enhancement of the Combined Arms Land System, domestic manufacture of guided weapons, explosive ordnance and munitions, development and integration of autonomous systems, integration and enhancement of battle space awareness and management systems, test and evaluation, certification and systems assurance. AIDN welcomes the commitment by Defence Industry Minister Pat Conroy to boost investment in local industry. A case in point is drone and counter-drone technology, where the government is investing $10 billion over the coming decade. Emerging sovereign drone innovators like Drone Shield, SciPac Systems and electro-optic systems are also entering global markets, indicating growing technological maturity. The Ukraine war and the change in character that war is bringing through the use of autonomous systems has seen capable and innovative Australian SMEs flourish. But there is more to be done. As I said, the first step towards the goal of a sovereign defence industry is ensuring Australia develops and maintains the capability to manufacture and maintain critical defence equipment within its borders. This includes not only combat platforms like submarines and armoured vehicles, but also the technologies that support them, such as advanced radar systems, communications equipment and cyber defence capabilities. A key enabler for achieving this vision is a strong public-private partnership. Australia's defence industry is relatively small when compared to global powers like the United States or China. However, Australia does have a rich history of innovation and technical expertise in defence and aerospace technologies. By fostering collaboration between defence manufacturers, universities, research institutions and government agencies, Australia can develop homegrown expertise and enhance its technological capabilities. Programs such as the Advanced Strategic Capabilities Accelerator, or ASCA, are a good start. This was set up to ensure innovative technologies could be quickly translated into practical defence capabilities. But further investment in these areas is necessary to ensure that Australia remains at the cutting edge of defence technology. Manufacturing, therefore, is the backbone of resilience. Advanced manufacturing and supply chain sufficiency are critical to reducing import dependency and fueling national innovation. A vital part of building a sustainable and sovereign defence industry is ensuring that the workforce is skilled and equipped to meet future challenges. The defence sector requires a diverse range of highly skilled workers, including engineers, technicians, cyber security experts, and project managers, to name a few. Investment in education and training programs, particularly in STEM, is crucial to ensure the workforce is prepared for the demands of an advanced and modern defence industry. In addition to formal education, fostering a culture of innovation and problem solving within the workforce will be the key to driving continuous improvement in defence technologies. The Australian Government must collaborate with educational institutions to create pathways for students to enter the defence industry while also supporting initiatives that promote lifelong learning and skill development within the existing workforce. This approach will help create a talent pool that is not only capable of developing cutting-edge defence technologies, but is also prepared to deal with the complete and rapidly evolving security challenges facing Australia. We all know that productivity is the new battleground. Or perhaps it's more that it's slumped so badly in recent decades that we must do something active to lift it and restore Australia's former world-leading position. I was able to meet with Defence Industry Minister Pat Conroy ahead of the Treasurer's Economic Reform Productivity Roundtable, along with other industry groups, to put a series of suggested reforms on the table. Productivity leading reform in defence will involve smarter processes, more efficient procurement, and greater upskilling for the workforce. These elements are essential if we are to make Australia globally competitive. Let's, for example, have a look at just one aspect of productivity, the impact of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence enhances operational efficiency, improves decision-making, and enables advanced military capabilities. It almost goes without saying that AI advances in logistics and supply chain alone will lead to improvements in efficiency and productivity that will drive the defence dollar further and lead to less waste. With training and simulation, AI enhances military training programs by creating realistic simulations based on user behaviour and preparing personnel for unpredictable battlefield conditions. These are just some of the applications of the new frontier. Productivity gains are one element, but a strong, sovereign defence industry also offers numerous economic and strategic benefits. For one, it creates jobs and stimulates local economies, particularly in regional areas where manufacturing and defence-related industries can serve as important economic pillars. By investing in local industries, Australia can reduce its reliance on imports, which can save the government and taxpayers money over time. Furthermore, a thriving defence industry can drive innovation in other sectors, such as manufacturing, IT, and cybersecurity, thereby strengthening Australia's overall economy. From a strategic perspective, building a robust defence industry would enhance Australia's global influence. By producing advanced military technology and systems, Australia could become a leading exporter of defence products to other nations, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, where there is an increasing demand for military equipment. One only has to look to Sweden to see how a smaller country can develop an indigenous export defence industry. Defence exports would not only generate revenue, but also strengthen Australia's diplomatic ties with its regional allies, cementing its role as a key player in regional security. So there's the vision of what we can achieve as a defence enterprise if we are committed to it. So what are the opportunities for improvement? Well, for most SMEs, there are simply too many barriers to entry to do business with defence. AIDN does not want to detract from the hard-working people in CASG, Defence APS, or in the ADF, who work towards standards of excellence. But they are hamstrung by defence policies and processes that quite frankly belong to a bygone era. We need a defence enterprise that is agile and can pivot to provide whatever capabilities are required. But we are falling very short of that goal at the moment. Some SMEs offer their wares to overseas allies first, because it is often easier than doing business with defence in Australia. The attitude by some Australian defence divisions seems to be, go and prove your product overseas and then we can talk. It's a strange type of mentality that we won't grow it here, but we need to send it overseas first. But defence exporting also faces its own challenges, with many permits required, and they can take too long to attain. There are also many challenges in the domestic procurement process itself, which sees bids and contracts taking too long to approve, by which time many firms opt to give up or simply leave the defence sector altogether. In some cases, slow decision making means defence businesses are forced to sell or close down. Contracting templates are simply too complicated, particularly if you're an SME supplying a simple item to the ADF. As CEO, I spend a lot of time talking to AIDN members, and I can tell you many of these concerns are raised with me time and time again. And I'm not arguing here that we can or should relax our guard on defence security or cyber security standards to accommodate SMEs. Cyber security in particular is essential for the modern defence business, but we can improve the process. AIDN acknowledges reforms to the ASDEFCON suite of contracts are underway, but still more reform is needed. You read about delays and cost overruns with major projects in the media all the time. But there is a fundamental underlying procurement challenge here. Defence needs to take more of the risk in procurement. Until it does, I fear we'll not get the promised land of increased productivity and driving the defence dollar further. And this is something we need to do. We need to restore public confidence that the defence enterprise can produce its goods and services on time and on budget. Industry will play its part. There's no doubt. We need to get the message out that this is happening because it does. But sadly, the bad projects attract all the attention, while those that are travelling well seem unworthy of any praise. This is a paradigm that needs to change. So, what would make for a better operating environment which would make the SME sector expand and flourish and build Australia's resilience and self-reliance? I want to emphasise that genuine sovereign capability requires building robust supply chains. We need local manufacturing, we need munitions output, we need maintenance and upgrade facilities, and drone systems to all be developed domestically. We need to elevate Australian SMEs in the defence industrial ecosystem, not just as subcontractors, but as full agents of sovereign capability. AIDN's advocacy emphasises that only through a stronger, connected and well-funded network of SMEs can Australia deliver on its vision amid one of the most precarious strategic landscapes since World War II. To deliver real sovereign capability, not just declared goals, Australia must move beyond words or sustained investments, at scale embracing a vision for a networked, capable, resilient domestic defence industry. To spell these elements out in more detail, the first requirement is to mandate a minimum percentage of defence procurement contracts for Australian SMEs. This would be separate from the current Australian industry capability plans that the primes or overseas-based companies have to fulfil in involving Australian SMEs in their projects. This would ensure genuine sovereign participation. We need to ensure there is a greater release of open tenders to expand direct access opportunities for Australian SMEs across the defence supply chain. We need to secure binding commitments for Australian SME content in every defence program with transparent reporting and accountability measures. We need a revamp of the Defence Industry Development Strategy that is due in 2026. And that document should explicitly seek to prioritise SME-led contributions to sovereign capability. A government body should also be established to perform an annual independent audit of Australian Industry Capability Plan compliance and Australian SME involvement with publicly reported findings to ensure accountability and measurable outcomes. The Australian Industry Capability Construct is intended to encourage primes to use Australian subcontractors, but many factors undermine program effectiveness, which is why AIDN recommends enforceable mandates. Let's also have a look at the Global Supply Chain Program, which the government hails as a success. More than $2.2 billion of work has benefited almost 300 Australian suppliers over many years, and that is definitely to be applauded. But commercial factors continue to constrain the nature of Australian business in supplying commodity and manufacturing type work. AIDN believes Defence needs to use other mechanisms beyond the GSC scheme to gain export markets for Australian SMEs offering IP-rich technology or advanced manufacturing supplies. To that end, AIDN has been very active in this space, seeking to bring foreign governments and their overseas suppliers together to enhance the global supply chain for all countries concerned. For example, AIDN engages directly with UK, US, Defence and teaming agreement stakeholders to generate SME opportunities in the AUKUS program. AIDN is also involved in negotiating MOUs and strategic agreements with international customers to secure sustained high-value contracts for Australian SMEs. AIDN's advocacy has increasingly extended beyond Australia's borders. During the federal election campaign earlier this year, I was in the United States building international relationships to position AIDN as the lead industry body supporting AUKUS Pillars 1 and 2. Back home, these efforts include engagement with key partners such as Babcock, Huntington Ingalls and several Australian state and territory governments, including Tasmania, the Northern Territory and South Australia, as well as regional defence bodies like DTC and HunterNet. To sum up, a strong industry means a strong nation. A sovereign, innovative and productive defence industry not only safeguards national security, but drives economic growth and creates high-value jobs. Let's briefly look at AUKUS. Given the Indo-Pac trade show is a few weeks away, it's going to be a topic on everybody's lips. AIDN embraces the trilateral partnership which forms a foundation for Australia's security, including the effort to acquire Virginia-class submarines from the US, and then the build of the fleet of SSN AUKUS nuclear-powered submarines in Adelaide. For example, many AIDN members have entered technical assessment and validation processes being run by H&B out of Perth to ensure Australian companies get a shot at submarine supply chains in all three countries. But there is one aspect which consistently raises the ire of SMEs. While they struggle with limited funding at home, they view the large sums of money being provided to prop up US submarine production and the production of the nuclear submarine reactors in the UK somewhat dimly. They understand the rationale, but don't understand why Australian industry and SMEs don't come first. I mean, if government can afford to spend almost $10 billion on US and UK industry, then surely it can find the dollars to adequately fund Australian defence industry and the capabilities Australia needs. This is felt acutely by the Australian-owned and operated SME sector, who see spending cuts to domestic maintenance budgets and non-AUKUS programs. With AUKUS Pillar 2, there has been frustration among SMEs with accessing the opportunities available. AIDN thanks our fellow industry lobbying group AI Group for their very comprehensive report on AUKUS Pillar 2, which found it was quote-unquote drifting, recommending it be refocused on a lesser number of more effective capabilities. So we hope to see improvement in AUKUS Pillar 2 and the opportunities flowing to Australian SMEs, and note that is still very much a work in progress. Perhaps one other element I should mention is the need for an industrialisation strategy which ensures there are sufficient skilled workers. The AUKUS effort alone will require the creation of 20,000 Australian jobs over 30 years. This is not to mention the thousands of other jobs required to fill ADF capabilities. But that's just a brief appraisal of some SME concerns about AUKUS. So let's return to the larger picture. At the risk of repetition, there are many reasons why Australia must develop a strong Indigenous sovereign defence capability, and I've outlined many of those for you here today. Clearly, there is an economic benefit to Australia and a return on investment for the taxpayer, and we have discussed reforms that can drive the defence dollar further than it goes today. But the most compelling argument remains the need for national resilience and the ability to resupply and provide maintenance to the ADF. In this increasingly volatile and dangerous world, such elements must be considered strategic requirements. Australian industry needs to be incorporated into the planning and execution of all defence activities. To do otherwise is to cede Australia's sovereignty to others, reliable allies though they may be. AIDN believes Australia's sovereign defence priorities can only be achieved if the procurement framework within the Department of Defence undergoes a transformative shift. That shift must guarantee genuinely local, Australian-owned small and medium-sized businesses are not merely benefiting but truly thriving by obtaining substantial work opportunities. For Australia's defence industry to be self-sufficient and highly capable, it is imperative to build a robust local supply chain that can support the Defence Force in the event Australia must rely solely on local resources. It is crucial that the Department of Defence has a procurement framework that is tailored to favour and support local small to medium-sized enterprises. Australia is at a crossroads, and Australia has a choice to make. We can continue down the path of dependency, hoping that global supply chains and alliances will always deliver what we need when we need it, or we can take control of our future. Sovereignty by 2035 is not a slogan. It's a national imperative. It means a stronger manufacturing base, smarter and more productive industry, and the ability to innovate at speed. It means creating jobs, driving economic growth, and building an industrial foundation that can withstand the uncertainties of tomorrow. This is not just about defence. It's about who we are as a nation. Manufacturing strength is the backbone of resilience. Productivity is the engine of competitiveness, and a strong sovereign industry is the shield that protects our security and prosperity. No one wants conflict, but prudence demands preparation. If we seize this moment, invest in our capabilities, and back our own people, then by 2035, Australia will not only be secure, it will be stronger, more confident, and a true leader in the region. The race for sovereignty has already begun. The question is, will we finish it in time? Thank you.
Beginning on the macros, so you've spoken about previous calls to increase defence funding. The trajectory is for it to get to just under 2.4%. So if we're assuming AUKUS happens, but we still need, separate to that, sovereignty and the ability to defend ourselves, what percent do you think we actually need to get to?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that the economists should really look at in the Australian government. As I said in my speech, AIDN welcomes any increase. The answer to the question is really a reverse engineering model. We need to figure out what will provide the Australian warfighters with an asymmetric capability, and that's based on our adversaries and our assessment of those. And then we need to figure out what that costs, and that should be the budget. So putting as a percentage of GDP, if we increase productivity and other numbers move, the percentage will move as well. We've seen recent efforts by the government to recalculate what the GDP number is, and they've included a calculation that pulls in things like defence pensions, for example. So I don't place a great deal of importance on the percentage number.
Okay. I think they use that, to be fair, as sort of a global comparison because other countries do that, but I take your point. So you'd almost say we need to assess what sovereignty and defence capability even is. Are we talking another white paper, and then you get the amount, and then you get the funding? Because, I mean, the government has said they're not focused on the percent either. I suppose that gets thrown at them. So you're on the same page there. It's probably just the amount you're suggesting needs to be a lot more.
Well, there's two elements here, Tom. One is the amount needs to be more. If we consider that the defence budget this year is $59 billion, it's the largest number in a long time. We're sending nearly $10 billion offshore. That gives us $49 billion in Australia. I think most Australians would agree that recently there was a cost of living crisis, and cost of living has increased. That means the cost of goods has increased. Now, if the cost of goods has increased by a CPI rate, do we know that the $49 billion that is left over has matched that CPI rate for what we're buying for Australia's warfighters? I haven't seen any analysis come out on that. It would be good to know. That number will tell us how far short we are. And then what Australian defence industry needs in the SME sector is a larger piece of the remaining pie. Australia is committed to the submarine program, to AUKUS. What's left? What can we have? What can we supply? Providing an asymmetric advantage to our warfighters, it costs money to do that. But what we need is to have more visibility and clarity on what our adversaries are doing.
And is there a Venn diagram that shades deepest when you think of, first of all, things that we should be making to help with our actual defence, but also that might present that export opportunity you spoke about? Is there one thing in particular or a couple of things you would really like to ramp up and that would fit both of those areas?
Well, there's probably two things. I mean, number one, there are a million things, without a shadow of a doubt. You speak to any warfighter across any service, we have five domains in Australia in which we could potentially defend. And they'll all ask for different things and a lot of things. In reality, I think a lot of the rhetoric, the public rhetoric, has been shaped by the conflict in Ukraine at the moment. And we've seen a massive, massive growth in interest in automated, uncrewed systems, automated systems and drones. Everybody will say that drones are the way forward. They've seen that in action. But we've got to remember that Ukraine as a country with no navy has taken out 40% of Russia's naval fleet. And that's all through the use of uncrewed naval systems. So whether they fly or whether they're in the maritime domain, I think uncrewed systems is probably the key one there.
Okay. Before I go to the floor as well, you mentioned the hurdles for SMEs and them giving up. What's a specific example where you just thought, there's no common sense in this, and in the true tradition of defence, you can redact names if you'd like, but an example where you just think, how, what bureaucrat has possibly decided this is a good idea?
If I redact it, it'll be a two-word answer. So there are a couple of instances, and I'll tell you one with an unnamed company. Unnamed company went to Defence, offered, it was actually an autonomous system which provided 16 different points of clarity and asymmetric advantage to Australia's warfighter. It was actually run through 3 different stages. There were 2 things that happened at the end of the day. The first one is that Defence made a statement, or a person from Defence made a statement, that we really don't want to take risk in this platform. Can you please sell it to a prime so they can sell it to us? Why are you adding money onto this? Why are you adding cost for the Australian warfighter? The second thing was, once that was actually rejected reasonably wholeheartedly, they said, okay, come along to a day where we will have 26 vendors on site and you can demonstrate it and you can answer technical questions, thereby effectively requiring that they give up all their IP. Again, IP protection needs to be a thing in Australian industry. Why would any business go and say, this is how you do this? They've just lost their advantage, and so is the Australian warfighter.
All right, let's go to the floor. First question, Andrew Green from the Nightly.
Mike Johnson, Andrew from the Nightly and the West Australian. Towards the end of your speech, you talked about resilience, national resilience. Would it be fair to say for resilience in defence, it's more about consumables rather than heavy equipment? And would Australia be better served in investing in stockpiles of ammunition, fuel or spare parts, rather than chasing projects that never actually lead to capability? And a follow-on question to that, is AIDN concerned about the rhetoric now that's all about speed to capability and cost, and the effect that that may have on making purchases overseas, I think particularly of general purpose frigates? And could you predict how many of those vessels will actually be built at Henderson?
Well, thank you for the question. It's an interesting one. I would very much not like to take a guess at the government's plans and how many frigates will come in and be operational. I think that's well outside of my scope, and I wouldn't like to put words in the government's mouth. As for the rest of it, I'll offer you this. If you see a picture of capability and it has a large item that may deliver a kinetic object to a target, That particular large item is not just the large item. It has munitions, it has fuel, it has, if it's a land-going vehicle, it has tyres, it has wheels, it has steel, it has people, it has protective systems, it has counter-electronic warfare systems in it. We need all of the above. So it's not just about the big ticket items. It certainly is, but under every big ticket item, there's 1,000 small items. There is a lot of maintenance and ongoing repair that goes onto a product. Even if you use that product, that big box item in training, you still wear things out. You need to replace tyres, you need to do servicing on it. So it's actually a requirement that we do a whole bunch of stuff there. Australia, in its wisdom, needs to look at that Venn diagram and the supply of all those components to ensure that we have resilience. Resilience, if we enter a direct conflict on Australian soil, resilience will be measured in the time that it takes for us to be beaten or us to repel anyone that we want to. And that's the key thing. How many we need depends on the adversary. The capability is an asymmetric advantage to the warfighter. That means, can we beat them if they come here? Either way, we need more of everything, and we need it right now. We need it in the next 1 to 3 years.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Andrew Probyn from the Nine Network.
G'day, Mike. Thanks for your speech. What are you doing to align your industry with Australia's natural abundance in critical minerals, especially given the fact that this is a great point of leverage with the Trump administration, and which, you, as you say, is causing trouble for your industry and many others in Australia?
Oh, thank you for the question. There's two things I'd like to respond. One, critical minerals, and second, the net zero carbon policy. We're actually looking at both of those now. The federal government has actually established through the Prime Minister and Cabinet's office a bit of a committee to look at critical minerals. So it's probably inappropriate for me to comment on that particular point at this time. I'll leave that to the federal government. They're the specialists in this area. I think critical minerals, if we understand the requirement for critical minerals in silicon chip manufacturing and other critical elements such as batteries, etc., in all of our products, we absolutely need to take advantage of that right now. We need to look at it, we need to understand what it is, and we need to make sure that AIDN as a business and all of our members understand the potential impacts it has to providing the products that our warfighters need. We're actually looking at that. We are invited to participate in the Prime Minister and Cabinet working task force on critical minerals. So I'll have more information on that, hopefully, in 4 to 6 weeks' time.
But what are the bits and bobs that you could make and your members could make that actually use the minerals that we can dig up here in Australia?
Almost everything. Almost everything. Anything that has a silicon chip, and there's a lot of electronic product today, anything with electronic warfare, anything with a computer in it, your iPhone in your pocket, I would imagine, they all have chips in it. That uses critical minerals. Anything with a rechargeable battery or battery in it, and most everything has batteries in it. Batteries are used for, not only power supply, but also backup emergency power. So it's almost a universal statement, except for, perhaps for tyres, but it's almost a universal statement that the minerals are required in everything.
Can I just ask a follow-up to Tom's last question about the Australian vendor who was asked to display their wares in front of 16 other vendors? I would love to know the name of that company for a start. But can you give us an example of where Australian innovation has ended up being on the market or the factory floor of a US or European company in the past 5 years, and with specifics?
Well, great question. I'm aware of a few, definitely aware of a few, mostly in the autonomous space.
Here's your opportunity, national telly, come on.
Thanks, Andrew. One of the great things about this country, whilst we absolutely embrace free speech, we also have a thing called the Australia Privacy Principles. So for that aspect, it's a bit challenging for me to stand up here and name companies or name identifying opportunities and processes that have occurred which could easily identify the company. So to that end, unfortunately, I can't really give you more detail without giving away who it is. I can tell you there are situations of that has occurred. I can tell you that there was one autonomous system that ended up on the floor, not so much of the US, but certainly in Germany. And that was a little bit over, that was 6 years ago. But one ended up in Germany, a bunch ended up in the US. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. Innovators and companies in Australia that do wonderful work will not go and give something away for no return. Business in Australia is here to make money. That is the point of running a business. AIDN supports those SMEs that are in business to support our warfighters and provide an asymmetric advantage. What we need to do is ensure that our defence industry is sovereign, capable, and there's demand to be able to supply those products to Australian defence. And we need to do that locally in Australia. We cannot sell this stuff overseas and then buy it back or hope that it comes.
Do you think that one of the problems is the Australian culture, that we don't back ourselves as much? When you think of, say, Anduril, which was literally nothing and then gets backed by the US government and becomes this multi-billion-dollar company, what is it about Australia, our appetite to risk, for risk, and the Defence Department itself that's holding your industry back?
Well, it's a great question. The example that you used being Anduril, I'm sure they didn't decide to open the doors in the US one day and see how it goes, quote unquote. I'm sure they went there because there was an opportunity in a much larger market to monetise their product, which in return increases the development of that product, so it provides an even greater asymmetrical advantage. It's all about the markets. Australia's Defence Force is a medium-sized Defence Force, as I said in my speech. It's much smaller than Asia and the US. If you're not going to have demand in Australia because there's not enough money, or there's not enough warfighters, or there's not enough deemed requirement for it, you will take it offshore. You will go to where you can actually monetise the ongoing cyclical development of your platform or product. In that case, that's what they did. Australia can back it, and Australia has backed $10 billion to the drone and counter-drone industry. I named several businesses that were the beneficiaries of that. I think most, if not all of those businesses, have taken their product overseas and sell it into markets other than Australia.
So you've got obviously some very big markets around the world. We're always going to lose some, but you'd hope we might lose some because of scale. We don't want to lose them because of process and bureaucracy.
Well, put simply, we need to develop everything in Australia, and then we need to take what we've developed in Australia and sell it into those markets so that we can get money to uplift the cyclical improvement of those products.
Olivia Casely from the ABC.
Olivia Casely from the ABC, thanks very much for your speech. You spoke about the need to reprioritise local defence manufacturing, say, over international counterparts, and boosting defence funding domestically in general. How do you think the government is going when it comes to, I guess, bringing the public along and selling that idea that more defence investment is necessary? Do they need to express that message more clearly?
Within the confines of what is termed security, yes, absolutely. The challenge with announcing from the pulpit, if you'll pardon the expression, as to what Australian Defence Organisation needs is that every time we sell the Australian industry in a public sense, our adversaries are listening. If they know what we've got, they won't be working on what we're working on, they'll be working on the next generation after what we're working on, and therefore we no longer have an asymmetric advantage for our warfighters. Australian government could help industry by making statements around the demand requirements for the goods and services that we can produce right now or in the near-term future. Absolutely, the messaging needs to be improved, it needs to be more, and it needs to be clearly articulated. In my speech, I spoke about AUKUS Pillar 2. Now, the report that another group did basically said it's drifting. We need fewer items of interest in there, and we need to do that better. And that messaging alone, if the government could push that out and say, here's what we need, even if it's in a classified briefing, and here's where we need it by, industry would welcome that because they know what to focus on. They know what to invest in. They have a potential horizon timeline on when things will be required. That would be fantastic for industry. Saying it's a bunch of things and it's a bit blasé, not so good.
Thanks.
Zach De Silva from AAP.
Hello, Mr. Johnson. Zach De Silva from Australian Associated Press. I just wanted to follow up on an answer you gave to Andrew earlier about Australian technology ending up on factory floors overseas. How is that happening? Is this a case of Australian companies inadvertently revealing their IP, like you said, at these kinds of defence showcases? Or is this a case of corporate espionage or somewhere in between?
Well, it's generally not corporate espionage, let me put it that way. There's a couple of reasons why this happens. Number one, if you can't monetise the product in Australia, you may take it overseas and you may actually sell the entire IP to an overseas entity. You've monetised your bit and you've let it go. Number two, if a company is looking for, so we call TRL, technical readiness level, they go from stages 1 to 9. 1 is you're thinking about a concept, broadly speaking, and 9 is it's actually been tried in theatre, in battle somewhere. There is an adverse opinion of risk in Australian defence. We're a medium defence force, we don't have a lot of money, demand signals are low. Can you please go and increase the TRL of your product? And once you have, come back and then we'll look at it. The only way you can do that is to actually get it into theatre. And if Australian Defence won't take it into theatre, even as a trial, because it's an unknown, it represents risk, it might present undue risk to the Australian warfighter in particular scenarios, then you send it overseas. Now, if you send it overseas, there's only 2 ways to do that. You either know someone that will literally walk your product into an overseas defence force, or you partner with a local entity, because most SMEs in this country don't have the money to go, we're going to invest however many millions of dollars to start up a business in that country and take our product into a TRL add-on environment. So you might do a partnership. The partnership might involve the transfer of IP. Today you need an export licence or an exemption to be able to do that. The easiest way and quickest way to do that is to perhaps sell it. Sell your IP over there. You can build it under licence in Australia, so you're effectively selling your own IP and licensing it back. The licence costs, therefore, are an impost into the profit margin, and you can no longer develop your own product. You've sold that offshore.
So when you talk about Australian IP ending up overseas, ending up on factory floors, often it is given up semi-willingly in that companies don't want to or can't manufacture, use it here, and so they're sending it overseas rather than this being taken by other companies without their permission.
Look, in my assessment, and it's only my assessment, I think that would be a majority of the cases. I think we've all seen on the news elements where in the Ukraine or perhaps in Russia, you get a downed autonomous aircraft and somebody takes it away, pulls it apart, reverse engineers it. So there are elements like that as well.
Thank you.
Is the risk partly or mainly financial? They're afraid. You mentioned the headlines, and we've seen them over the years, cost blowouts, these sorts of things. Is that what they're worried about? A failed project that costs money?
Australian Defence?
Yeah.
I believe so.
Right.
I believe so. ANAO regularly reviews contracts for defence, and ANAO, they regularly produce reports that say perhaps this wasn't done to the best of the ability. This was, was it a good use of money? Was it a pertinent investment for the taxpayer? That is the purpose of ANAO. There is a risk aversion to getting a bad report card from ANAO. So yes, that definitely forms part of it.
Corey McLeod from Innovation Oz.
Thank you so much. I've got 2 questions relating to space as one of the 5 domains. The last 12 months we've seen some very big satellite contract plans shuttered, which obviously has huge implications from a sovereignty perspective. How has that affected local industry from a defence supply chain manufacturing? Secondly, ITAR. Have there been changes under Trump making it increasingly difficult for those same companies selling into the US?
Thanks. I'll answer the first question. The shuttering of a space program, and I think it's no secret, it's been publicly announced that the Prime that was primarily behind that program claims they lost $300 million. My point in all of this is that $300 million that's lost will be added onto the bill somewhere else. Nobody's going to walk away from that sort of a loss and say, okay, we understand this is a government requirement, they'll add it on somewhere. I'm aware of a lot of our members that were involved in that program, and they were involved in that program over 7 years. 7 years of investment in people and personnel and training and capability. To walk away from it because it gets cancelled is abhorrent, quite frankly. It's absolutely prejudicial against Australian industry to cancel a program by simply saying we don't have enough money. Surely governments can plan better than that. That's why we have a budget. Now, your second question. Sorry, what was your second question?
ITAR. And
yeah. No. In short, nothing that is relevant to defence industry. EAR and ITAR lists do get updated periodically from time to time. It's standard run-of-the-mill stuff. It's administered by Department of State in the US, Department of Defence and Department of Commerce actually administer what Department of State put together. I'm not aware of any changes in that other than the standard reviews that occur. It's more so the tariffs that have been introduced and the paperwork, the export paperwork out of Australia, which now requires the country of origin for your materials. So you can't just sell something that's fully aluminium for X, and that's what we sell it for. You can't say it comes from Australia if we export it. You need to provide source of country proof. This came from this country, therefore that tariff will apply to this good as we send it to the US.
Okay, thank you.
Nick Stewart from Ability News.
Thanks very much for your speech. They say we always prepare to fight the last war. At the moment, we're spending so much money, $10 billion, you said, nearly 20% of the defence budget, on big platforms that are coming from overseas, massive complexity. But when you look at Ukraine, for example, the obvious dimension, you can see the incredible sophistication and effectiveness of small platforms that are locally homegrown, that are getting beyond the massive ones. Are we doing things the wrong way? Do we need to actually say, I mean, should Greg, you didn't mention Combay's name at all, but do you think that this government, the Defence Minister, needs to actually prioritise Australian business and say, look, we're looking for small Australian answers, and then, to use Mao's word, let the flowers bloom where they may. I mean, wouldn't it be better to actually get small Australian answers, choose the best of those, and then really invigorate, fertilise them so that we're providing a genuine Australian answer to our defence?
Well, it's an interesting concept to ponder. The challenge in that is that Australia's geographical size is vast, very vast. Having 6 submarines in our country, in our fleet at the moment, and we have 2 in deep maintenance, 2 in regular maintenance and 2 that are operational, it's a lot of area to cover. Some of that rings true. If you start small and you cycle develop and you spiral develop up and it gets bigger and bigger, fantastic, that may work. The problem that we have in Australia is that we always had a 10-year time frame, a 10-year window before we thought conflict of any sort would be on our doorstep. That time frame has reduced. Where the government can make improvements here is that they're still largely operating on a 10-year time frame with respect to their purchasing and their plans for what Australia has. Not to mention the least of which is that we had a supplier of submarines that we stopped and we changed course and we implemented a new thing, and AUKUS was announced, and that was several years ago. And then with successive government changes across the tripartite area, across UK, US and Australia, they're all doing reviews. Now the reviews are a natural part of government coming into power. They need to understand the programs, what they mean and what they'll bring. But it causes delays, and it causes delays, and it causes minor shifts in direction. We all want AUKUS to succeed. And if it's managed well, it will do well, and it will provide jobs for Australians, and it will provide income for industry, and it will provide a rise in productivity in Australia. But if the AUKUS program is not managed well, it could be a catastrophic failure. And that will be another program that will be added to the list, such as the space program, that may change direction again. If that changes direction again, how many years has this been in play right now? We'll start the clock again. We'll start from the beginning. We'll actually start that process yet again. It may be not 2030, maybe not 2035, it might be 2040 before we see any revitalisation of that particular program.
So the government needs to prioritise the development of small Australian industries that can do this.
So the Australian government needs to prioritise the development of Australia's sovereign industrial defence industry. Now that will go across many products, many platforms and many regions in Australia. I don't want to put a cap on it and say it's just this size. It may not be appropriate in some areas and probably very inappropriate in other areas given the geographic size of Australia. But the government absolutely needs to focus on building an Indigenous sovereign industrial capability for our warfighters so they can get an asymmetric advantage in times of conflict, so we don't have to rely on our allies, as good as they are, and hope that we receive things on time and hope they've got enough of them to supply to us.
Andrew Green is back.
Mike. Mike, a follow-up question on the political environment and dealing with governments. Does AIDN and its members find that there are vendettas that are held by ministers from both sides and members of the department when they challenge their orthodoxy? Is that something you've experienced?
So AIDN is in the rather luxurious position of being politically neutral. We actually have really good relationships with both major parties in Australia and some of the independents. This year alone, I've met with both sides. I've met with members of Parliament on both sides of the House. I would not venture an answer based on your question. I'm sure if any of that does exist, it's all kept within their walls, and I'm sure the last thing that any Member of Parliament would want to do is invite me into their chambers or their office and sit down and go, so, here's my issue with someone else.
Isn't that most of the reason why you exist, though, is to provide cover for companies that can't say the things they perhaps want to say?
Well, AIDN provides advocacy, education and communication to our members in Australia's defence industry. It's not so much about who likes who, okay? One of the luxuries that we have, we were here in this very room last night, we celebrated our 30th anniversary of AIDN being an entity in Australia. As the industry has grown and transformed over 30 years, the luxury that I have as Chief Executive of AIDN is that the underlying requirement to go and advocate and educate our members and communicate what we're doing, where we're doing it, how we're doing it, and what the best practice is, has not changed over 30 years. So certainly over a period of time in federal parliament, we've seen a lot of members come and go. The one thing that is consistent is that members of parliament, they will actually welcome AIDN into their offices. They'll listen to what we've got to say. We will advocate on behalf of our membership. That is what we do.
I notice you didn't talk about vendettas inside the Defence Department, but we can perhaps
look, I can tell you that in Canberra, every second week I'm that way, and every other week I'm that way, being Parliament House and Russell Defence officers, respectively. It matters not whether it is a publicly elected servant or somebody in uniform. The levels of professionalism in Australia are very high, and everybody sticks to that.
Next question, Catherine Zeising from Sir Richard Williams Foundation.
Good afternoon, Mike. Thank you for your comments this afternoon. Kath Zeising, passionate defence industry member. You mentioned many times that manufacturing is the backbone of resilience, the key theme for today. I'd just like to draw your attention to some figures that the RBA has been tracking for quite some time. So in 1990, manufacturing made up 13.6% of Australian output in terms of industry, and also the same amount in exports. Fast forward 35 years to now, manufacturing output in Australia is 5.9% and our exports make up 8.1%. Obviously, defence is not the only part of our economy undertaking manufacturing, but as a whole, it has significantly shrunk over the years. The trend is downwards. What is government doing to reverse this trend, noting that it's not Defence's job to support Australian industry, that is a political aim?
Yeah, that is a great question, and that's one that I take to Parliament House on almost a fortnightly basis. So when we talk about productivity and we talk about output per unit of capita spent or wages spent, that is the focus. Jim Chalmers ran his Treasurer's Economic Roundtable on productivity. As I said in my speech, I was fortunate enough to be a part of the contribution to that from a defence industry standpoint. I don't know that federal parliament, and you must remember here that politicians may not be business owners. They're publicly elected officials. They do a sterling job across usually a number of portfolios per person these days. We no longer, generally have one member of parliament with one portfolio. But manufacturing is a key focus area in federal politics. One of the challenges that we have in manufacturing is actually the cost of energy, whether it be electricity, whether it be gas. The cost of production is going up, and it's going up enormously. The federal government is actually looking at whether they perhaps subsidise an element of it or not. Australian Energy Regulator has actually decreed on a number of years the price of electricity at a retail level. So manufacturing takes many, many forms, as you've rightly said. It's not up to Defence to fix the manufacturing issue in Australia. But Defence can help lift and boost manufacturers in Australia. If we had better demand signals, if we had more volume being required, I'm aware of a contract that was cut for a major Australian-based manufacturer in Defence. If they didn't cut that contract, if they gave us clear signals and more requirement, then absolutely we would manufacture more. We would manufacture more in this country and return it to the heyday of your earlier statistic that you gave us. So we absolutely can help that, but it is a long, long process.
1990 was not the heyday at 13.6%. Pre-World War II, 40% of our economy was manufacturing. So when Essington Lewis mobilised the industrial base, he had a large base to work with. We simply do not have that now. Should we find ourselves in a situation where resilience comes down to ourselves, we're in an existential fight, how do we mobilise the 60,000 members that AIDN represents?
So 60,000 employees. I'd love to have 60,000 members. It would put us in an entirely different category.
700 companies, 60,000 people.
You know, that is really a question for the federal government, to be honest. We have ideas. We take ideas to federal government every 2 weeks. Mobilising Australia's industrial base, the basis of that is that we need demand signals. We saw through COVID times, not that long ago, that the Australian federal government is very good at realising that there is an issue and then putting in place plans, payment processes, requirements, and they will build an industry very quickly. My fear is that the Australian government, whoever it is at the time, will wait until we have a conflict and then try and mobilise. Our fuel situation in Australia, for anybody who wants to go and look it up, is not as good as what it was several years ago. And I think we all know that. Our energy situation is not as good as what it was years ago. We also export most of our raw products, raw minerals, out of the ground and sell them overseas for processing. All that needs to change. If we do that, we can make good inroads.
Thank you.
Final question, we're going to squeeze in Hamish Arthur, club member.
G'day, Mike. Hamish Arthur, member of the National Press Club. Thanks for your address. Just wanted to take you back to your speech. You talked about sustainment a little bit and maintenance as well. And given we heard estimates last week from the department that the national work on the National Defence Strategy for next year is well underway, what's AIDN's views on investment in sustainment and what you'd like to see in the National Defence Strategy when it comes to sustainment?
Well, as you stated, it's in progress at the moment. To oversimplify my answer, the answer is more. We want more of everything. We want more funds. We want a larger piece of the pie of those funds to Australian SMEs in Australia's sovereign defence industry. We want more demand signals. We want more signalling to what we can do today, 1, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. We want more. And we want it to be strategically priced. And so I'll refer you to a comment very early on. The budget should be calculated based on an asymmetric advantage over our nearest competitor. If we reverse engineer that, it'll tell us what we need. And that's what the Australian government needs to do. We need to figure out where a flashpoint might be, when will we get an inflection point, and where geographically will that be located. I think it's fair to say that if Australia was in a land war, we would struggle. It's too late. I think we'll have air domain, we'll have cyber domain, we may have space domain, we'll certainly have sea domain inflection points in this country. So the government needs to figure out what's likely out of those, reverse engineer that, figure it out into a budget, figure that budget out, and then tell us what the demand is for fulfilling that budget. If we can get that, industry would have a much better view. As an SME, I can tell you, one of our members actually pointed out this to me during the week. Cash flow of an SME is the lifeblood of an SME. If you have a 12-month contract with Defence, it's likely that you won't get your profit in the door until months 11 and 12 out of a 12-month program. So SMEs already invest in developing and supplying defence capability to Australian Defence Force. And if anybody cancels that program before month 11, they've lost their profit. So, in answer to your question, we need to have some analysis, we need to have tactical analysis, supply analysis, we need to figure out what the real budget and actual budget should be, and we need demand signals from government around those statistics.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your address. You also get a guest membership conveniently located here, of course, close to the Defence You can hang out here between your next meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Mike Johnson.